As I get more rough, I've been thinking about cutting larger stones just to have something like big and cool to cut, in part because my dad gave me a couple of nice big quartz pieces, and to go from this to a cut stone would be way too much grinding on even 100 grit, and then I'd risk fracturing it and all that stuff. Even that, if I wanted to, it's kind of preformed, but it's still a too shallow of an angle, so I need to go a little steeper. So I've been thinking about how to like dop up a big stone and cut it in such a way that I get offcuts from the pieces while also forming it nice and, well enough where I don't have to grind away massive amounts of the stone. Like if I dop this one up and tried to cut it just as it is, that would just be a waste of, it's a kind of expensive material. And there are a couple of ways around that. One of the ways around that is with a saw mounted on your faceting machine. In my case, it would have to be probably a 4-inch blade. You could dop up your stone and mount it in here, and you could set the angle that you wanted, and then, slowly bring it in and cut it. I've heard that's what some people do, but there is a very slight risk to the mast of your machine if you have a mast machine, or like if it gets caught, then you can like, jerk it out of your hands, or it might just undop from the stone and pop off if you're not careful. That's one way to do it, but that is both kind of messy, and I would have to either like get a bigger splash pan, or I would have a little bit of room to have a splash pan and the saw blade going, or I would just make a big mess cutting, and you need a lot of water. And so what I want to do is use my trim saw, which is a 6-inch blade. So I do have 6-inch blades that I could try to mount on my faceting machine over there, but that would use up the whole area, and I would definitely have to remove my splash pan, and it would just be a big mess, and I don't want to get water in the mechanics or the electronics or the motor underneath. So what I thought was, I have a trim saw. If I put a blade on here, then I have a plane to cut on, and if I have a dop stick, if I have my stone mounted on the dop, I have a guide rail here that goes like this and can be perpendicular, so I could I could back this off, set that in there, and I could, trim the stone lengthwise that way on the dop if I were to securely mount my dop in here. But if I had a adjustable protractor type assembly here that I would probably have to mount in here, and then I could set my angle to 45 degrees this way. So it would be set in there like that, and then I could drag it through like that, and I would be cutting a 45-degree on my rough, adjust it as needed, so I could cut off, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and that would give me a much better offcut yield, and also get me closer to my final, or I guess my starting preform size. If they have a piece of quartz this big, then they got to grind away all that and all that and all in all directions, so you get a point at the bottom, and then you have to grind away all the top too. So if you don't start off with an optimized piece of rough, then you're grinding away essentially needlessly if you have another way to trim it up. And so that's something that I want to start working on here. And the question is, I think this setup is good enough to start with in terms of like mounting something in here. So I think I might need to do something like ask Mike to machine a block that could sit in here, and then on the, well, yeah. Before I go to Mike's with kind of a half-baked idea, I've been thinking about it a little bit more. This is a couple of days after I made that first part of the video, and I realized for a Raytech Shaw DOP, if I want to be able to rotate it, I have to be able to account for the little peg that juts out from there, and I have to be able to secure it. We need to also be able to angle it and account for that, and secure it. And rather than have something that pivots entirely, I realized for a preform, generally this is going to be upside down from your point of view, but you know, you have your girdle, your eventual girdle there. But if your rough is originally kind of blocky, you're mostly, for quartz anyway, your preform is suggested to be something like 45 degrees in that orientation. And your girdle up here, or your crown up here, you may need to just trim down or something. But for quartz and low RI, 45 degrees is, you know, all you need basically. If you have something like a garnet or a yag, maybe you could go like 42 degrees and go a little bit shallower. But I really think we only need maybe 2 angles, and I think in order to trim, you know, if you have a really long bit, you can do this, or maybe in some cases you'll want to trim off the crown or just like trim off the bottom. So I think maybe we'll do 42, 45, and then a 90 degree. And since Mike, I was originally going to ask Mike to do kind of a aluminum block where he'd, you know, machine a block and drill out or do other things that he would do with it, but Mike has a lot of 3D printing experience, and I think he could design this in a 3D printer relatively easily. And so what I'm thinking is we have, let's see, so what is it? Front side, top view. So our front is just going to be a block basically, and the height of that block is going to be the height of the amount of saw blade that sticks up above the guard on my trim saw. So my trim saw is a 6-inch. I think the clearance is something like 2 point something inches. So I need the block to only be about 2 inches tall, more or less. And I'm going to have the dop stick sit right in the middle of that block. And so from this angle, it's going to be a block. It's going to be a rectangle. So from the top, if I start off with a block, so that's my starting outline of a block that's going to be a rectangle, and that way I can clamp it in top and bottom with my little wing nut screws over here. And it needs to be long this way too. I think it'll be mostly rectangular in profile view. It'll just have a little different edge there. Why is that so dusty? It's a very dusty piece of paper for some reason. So the top view is going to be the most important to finagle with. I need to be able to have 2 angles and my 90 degree. So what I'm thinking is have a hole in the middle that will be 90 degrees. And the 90 degrees is easy. I can either put this in there and I can clamp it on both sides just by tension. It's the angles that are going to be the problem. With the dops, I can either do angle, or if we want to keep it a little simpler, I could just have a set screw drilled in through the top and tighten and loosen that as needed. And that would also allow me to move the dop in and out a little bit, and I wouldn't have to make it perfectly the same width as the dop, which would be a pretty big block actually now that I'm looking at it. So that may be the way to go, and then it would be something like this size where it would stick out on both sides, and I can move it in and out and set it there so that it would stay stable as I feed it into the saw this way. And what I'm thinking is on one side we have 2 basically crisscrossing holes. We're going to have a 45 degree going this way and a 42 degrees going that way. that would actually be very simple. I could just do a single set screw right there, and it would secure it in every direction as long as those crisscrossed in the middle there. The tricky bit is for the pin, which if I have the pin over here, if I secure it with the set screw here, this is where I want to cut it and feed it into the saw, if I rotate the pin, then that's going to be sticking into the plastic, and obviously we can't have that. And so I need to have this be angled very slightly that way so that the pin can sit flush across a flat surface wherever it is in case it needs to be that way, and have some clearance over here to rotate. And we need to do that in both cases. So in this case, this angle would be 45, so it's perpendicular to that, and in this case it would be 42, so it's perpendicular to that. So probably make that a little bit bigger. And I think that's all I need for that. 45 degrees sticks out there, 42 degrees sticks out there, 90 degrees will be there. And then we have our void spaces. And you can print small tubes like this in 3D printed material. I think it would be able to do that. If not, we can drill it out after the fact. It would just be a little more fiddly to get that right angle, or the correct angle. To test the new system, I'm going to take these couple pieces of citrine from Kyle over at Roller Rockhounds, and we'll dop them up. I'll maybe go this way since that one's just a little bit bigger. And I'll cut one of them on just the faceting machine and cut the other one on the trim saw and see how quickly we go from rough to a preformed stone. So let's get them, stick. Let's get those assembled. And for this I'm going to be cutting Mike's design, the Reverse Brilliant, modified for quartz. Since it's a design I know well and it should go pretty quick, I don't have to worry about getting the facets right. I've got them pretty well down. Well, that took a little bit less time than I was expecting. This is about 10 minutes of preforming at 360 grit here. I guess maybe I started off with kind of a point, so that helped, but I was able to quickly grind away a lot of material. I haven't really looked to see if there's any new fractures or anything that developed by doing this, but I think it still looks okay. Nothing broke off. The tip is still there, the culet. Sometimes that breaks off. And yeah, that went a lot faster than I was expecting, so certainly I don't need the preformer saw attachment for every stone, but we'll continue on our test and see how it compares. Well, that was only about 7-ish minutes to cut the girdle in on this. Goes fast because it's just an octagon. It was probably about 15 minutes. I may have to cut a larger stone here to give the saw a fighting chance to beat this method. Not that I want the fastest method, so if this is the way to go, that's the way to go. I just took off my lap to switch it out with another one and realized that I was actually cutting with my somewhere between 100 and 180 grit disc. The label is too eroded to be able to see what it is. So that explains why that cut so fast. Because normally, I don't go any coarser than my potential, I think it's a 360 grit disc. And yeah, this takes a little bit longer than the 100, obviously. And I wouldn't use that 100 on most stones. I barely use it at all anymore, actually. But I guess if this worked, maybe I should. Maybe that should be my conclusion from this video. That I can go coarser if I need to. Because I was surprised at how quickly that cut in. Huh. So it came back from Mike's and kind of printed up the design that I was thinking of. There's a set screw in there that will hold the dop in from either side. I don't remember which one is which, but one of these is 45 and one of these is 42 degrees. It is a little bit narrower than I thought, so I did have a little bit of extra space to add more, but I think this should be big enough to hold the dop at an okay angle. Back that off a little bit. So that's still enough space to put a pretty big gem in there. I might be able to squish that down a little more. It's a little bit tight in the back there. It doesn't, it's a little struggles to go all the way through, but that's a pretty good clearance. That would still be a pretty big gem on the end of that dop. And so that was my design. And the first thing Mike said when I started talking about things was, oh, why don't we do a little like protractor thing, which was also my first thought, but I didn't have a good vision of what to do. And Mike was immediately like, oh, we just put a circle on this and then we can rotate it like that and a little set screw and it'll be fine and good to go. I was like, okay. So we designed that one as well. And that's the set screw there. So we can mount this in here, clamp that down there, set this at any angle, and I guess that's interesting. So the clearance is going to be an issue. Maybe if we try the other way. So yeah, like I was thinking, I can't go this way because then the dop doesn't have enough angle, and you know that's not going to work. It's on the saw blade. If I mounted it like this and had it angled this way, that would actually be enough, and I could set that in there, and I would just get a wrench to tighten that down a little bit. But that would actually be fine, and I can do at least an angle. I still couldn't do a 45, which I didn't expect to be able to do, or a 90 degree. But I can do a 45 or a really, really steep angle, depending on what I wanted to do for a preform. So we have two options of designs to use. And I realized as we were designing this that I probably could have just done this at home and then brought the designs over to Mike's, because you know the program to design things is free, and it would have given me a little time to finagle and work things a little bit over. But you know, Mike designed this one in probably 5 minutes or something like that for my plans. And I think we'll try this one to start. Oh, which side was which? I have my dop with a bit of quartz on it to preform. So we'll stick it in there, feed it down in there, and yeah, it's a little bit tight in the back for whatever reason. I may need to get a drill and just drill that out a little bit, or I don't know if I have a thin file that I could use there. But maybe that's enough. And because of the way this is oriented, he tapped it on both sides so we can get this very long screw and turn it over. Well, we'll see how this goes. Rotating it while maintaining the depth of the cut is going to be kind of an issue, I think. And I mean, these offcuts are too small to do anything with, but it does mean that I didn't have to grind that away on my fastening machine. And there we go. Well, we were so close. Cutting it on there. Well, that was an experiment. Okay, we're going to try one more time with a bigger piece that would be more like what I'm looking for in terms of cutting down this big blocky piece of rutilated quartz. I trimmed up a bunch of it. It's really nice material, but it was a huge piece that I chopped up, and I chopped this one up, and we'll see how long it stays on the dop here. Well, the bigger piece worked. I only used super glue on this one because the wax is what broke on the other DOP that I tried. The wax is usually what breaks. Super glue is apparently stronger than at least the green wax that I use. It's kind of a preform. A little bit off center. I might have changed the depth as I went in. And I don't know if there's a fracture right here. I don't know if I caused that with the saw or if that was always there. Could still be a nice piece. I guess trimming up the edges would be a good thing to do too. I might be able to do that out here just by holding it perpendicular and feeding it in. But it is a little bit nerve-wracking to have it on here. I was feeding it in over here because when I press down over here too much, I worry that I would flex it and cause it to bend and jam up the saw blade. And I did try something else different, which was to use both a different saw blade, the MK301, but also I went on a very low speed. I was only at about speed 1.5, maybe close to 2. Like I think I was close to that line there. Yeah, I was probably about right on 1 during that. And at low speed causes less vibration, so it's less transferring over to the stone here. All in all, I'd say it's probably not worth it unless you have the perfect stone that you need to trim off. I mean, I would have trimmed, this is what I trimmed off with the saw. I would have had to grind this away on my saw or my faceting machine, which if I went with 100 grit, that could work. If I was trying to start off at a lower grit so I didn't damage the stone, then it would have taken a lot longer. But so also, I mean, using this, I also have to worry about causing damage to the stone and fracturing and all that. So I don't know that you really gain a whole lot by using the saw blade, except for to save perhaps your laps from a little bit of extraneous use. And maybe I'll still use this just to preform a couple of larger pieces like those sapphire boules, but in a general everyday use case, I don't think I'm going to take this another chunk and dop it up and take it to the saw blade. I'll just grind away, or maybe make a couple of cuts out here just by hand and go from there. But it was a fun experiment.